So one of the most important things to include in every wildlife garden is some water. And of course, it's one of those three foundational needs that we talked about: food, shelter and water. So it's really important to try and include some water in your wildlife garden. Now, some of you are going to be lucky enough to have space for a lovely, great big wildlife pond. Maybe you have one already. I'm going to give you some tips on how to make sure that pond is really functioning well for wildlife. But even if you haven't got space for a pond, like in this part of my garden, we've put this water trough in. This is an old agricultural trough and we filled it with water, and this is creating good habitat too for this part of the garden where it wasn't possible to put a pond. It's obviously better to have a really big pond if you can, but even a little bird bath, a water bowl or garden trough like this can provide all sorts of benefits. The key thing to remember with ponds is that it's all about diversity. So you want to think about a diversity of depths in your water. So if you've got a bird bath, you might want to make sure you've got a real gentle sloping side to the bowl of the bird bath. The same with a water bowl if you're putting one in. Gentle slopes are great, so you've got that easy access for birds or small mammals to get in and have a little drink. And also you have deep areas and shallow areas. So in this water trough, I don't know if you can see, but there's a little ramp that I've created up the side with tiles so that animals can crawl up to the edge. And then at this end of the tank, I've piled up lots of bricks and covered them with more attractive looking stones to create a shallow area. It's about a foot, comes out about a foot, that birds stand on and have a little splash about, and a little bit of a wash and a little bit of a drink in there. And then I've got a couple of other layers of depth in here too. So the next layer down is like a shallow shelf. It's about kind of 6 to 9 inches deep, and I can put emergent plants on there because of course you want to think about the diversity of plants that you're getting into your pond too. So you want to have some emergent plants, which are plants that sit on a shelf and their leaves obviously emerge out of the water. Those are really great for some of the insect larvae that ponds are so useful for. So the early stage in our insect life, some of them need to live in the water. So this is one of the reasons why water is so important. The classic one is dragonfly larvae, and if you're lucky enough, you'll see the larvae eventually, they live for years in the water, but eventually they crawl out on those emergent stems and they pupate there, and then they hatch out into beautiful dragonflies. So emergent plants are really useful for that. And then you also want some deep parts of the water if you've got space for a big enough water tank, so it can be as small as this. The deeper areas, you have plants that just kind of float around under the water, and they aerate the water. They provide really good water quality. You also want some sort of deep rooting, I've got them in pots here, plants with leaves that cover the surface. So the classic one is water lily, but there are loads of others, and there are dwarf water lilies that will fit into a really small container like this. Or if you have a big pond, you can get larger water lilies, obviously, that cover a larger area. And you want some of the water to be covered to create shady areas. We're looking for diversity again, and some of the water to be open to let the sun through. So you've got some light, some shade areas that will suit different types of insects. They'll create shady areas and areas with sort of plant stems and those plants that float around under the water. Submerged plants are great for different creatures to hide out in, and open spaces for things to swim around if you're getting tadpoles in there. So all these different types of habitats, different types of areas are really, really great. Where you do have space for a pond, then if it suits the aesthetic and it suits the shape of your space, go for a wiggly edged pond, a really kind of natural shaped pond rather than a rectangular one like this. If you can't, then a rectangular one, if you follow all those steps I've just talked about in creating a diversity of habitat in that pond, then you'll be really maximising what you can get from it. But if you can have a wiggly shaped edge, all the better. And with the deep end and a shallow end, those edges are such valuable habitat. All those edges is where most of the action goes on. So the more of that you can get in there, the better. But as I said, whatever size of space you have and whatever type of water suits your aesthetic and practically suits what you can achieve in your garden, really go for it. Just remember all those little tricks for creating diversity, and you'll have a really lovely, thriving water space for the wildlife in your garden.